as people start pouring in, welcome. My name is Maris, and I'm the Director of Communications and Community Impact for Tennessee Environmental Council. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and our mission is to help people and communities improve our environment for all. And we have an amazing pollinator team, and we call it Generate Some Buzz. And two of my teammates are on the call today. Miss Bryn, who's going to be helping with some tech stuff. She's going to be fielding some questions that you all might have during this presentation. If you're on the app or if you're on your computer, there's a Q&A button that would be super ideal for you to use so that we can see outside the chat box. If you put it in the chat, that's okay. We'll try to field it the best we can. And she's also going to put some links, some important links for you to connect with us in there as well. And also Monica. Monica is our pollinator program leader. And Monica, you want to tell us about what we're going to be doing today? We're going to talk about.
Yes, thank you, Maris. So, thank you very much for joining us today. As you probably know, we are the pollinator program, and our focus is to create native wildflower pollinator gardens in front yard and backyards, in community gardens, urban, suburban gardens. And we have a lot of participants who ask questions all the time about when they have larger habitats, how to do, what to do. And we realized the best way to help you with all these questions is to bring in the experts, Kindred Land Management. So we invited them and asked them to share their knowledge, to share their expertise with us and with all of you. So, Josh, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Monica. First of all, we're just huge fans of the work you all do at TEC and appreciative of the opportunity to share today. And just hats off to everybody that's joined. It's always so energizing to see the buzz and excitement around native habitat in general and specifically prairies. So thanks, everyone. Just a quick little bit about Kindred Land Management. Monica said my name is Josh Oates. I'm the co-founder. We are the Native Habitat Company, and our mission in life is to help landowners, both public and private, improve habitat on their properties that spans forestry work, native grasslands, pollinator habitats, prescribed fire, non-native invasive species control. Greta and I started this company for two reasons. One, we're super passionate about the work. We love what we do. There's so many negative influences out there degrading habitats. We wanted to be a force in the other direction, helping improve habitat. And the second reason is we kind of looked around and looked at the options available to landowners to do this work on a scale that's larger than a lawn or a garden. There really aren't a ton of options. So that's kind of the reason we exist, is to be a resource for landowners. So I know we'll go through Q&A at the end, but any question you have, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to point you in the right direction, even if it's just advice. And that's us. Marisol, I'll hand it back to you to introduce Greta.
Thanks, Josh. Yes, and Greta Flaig, thank you so much for being here today with us. She's the chief ecologist for Kindred Land Management, and she's going to be giving us an amazing presentation and introducing herself through that. So go ahead, Greta, if you want to share your presentation so we can get started.
Cool. Yep, let me share. All right.
Floor is yours.
Cool. Well, first of all, I want to say people who saw me before, I'm not in a dungeon. I am in my basement. I have a very young lab puppy upstairs, and she does not understand the concept of webinars. So I am down here and she is up there. So a little bit about myself. I just want to start off with that. I was born and I was raised in Illinois, where I was immediately interested in the natural world. I have a family farm in central Illinois where we have about 100 acres of both row crop agriculture and woods. So growing up in Illinois, and having this family farm where both agriculture and the natural sustainable ecosystems that we have there, we valued both of those. And from there, I was really able to understand the importance of both of these environments and how they can really coexist with each other. The first time I was on a prairie burn, I was about 8. They let me hold the drip torch, and I don't think I've ever been that excited since. But I try every day. So For the last 9 years, I've been in Tennessee. My forestry career started academically on the Cumberland Plateau at the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee. After college, I gained some experience in fisheries and watershed management before I found myself moving back towards forestry and prairie ecology and just the general land management side of things. Okay. There are so many ideas and concepts when it comes to land management. Some of them are based in scientific research, others are based on, more traditional practices that have been handed down generationally. I believe that a combination of these two schools of thought is the best way to view prairie management. There's so much more to prairie management than, what I'm going to have time for today. I'm assuming someone will shut my Zoom off at some point, but I could talk about it forever. Um, so for the purposes of today, I'm gonna do my best to, to hit core principles and benchmark concepts that are necessary for the understanding, for understanding the processes of prairie implementation and management in Tennessee. This can be applied to places other than Tennessee. However, this is where we come from, this is where we are now. So my focus will be on the ecosystems within Tennessee. And then we have a slide at the end with my contact information and all that, mine and Josh's. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions after the question and answer session that we have later today. All right, let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, our timeline for today, we're going to start with, what is a prairie and why do they matter? Obviously, in order to talk about prairies, we have to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then we're going to go through and we're going to talk about the foundations of planning and preparation, the foundations of implementation, and then management and maintenance of your prairie. And then, like everyone said, we'll end with a little question and answer session. All right. What is a grassland and why do they deserve all of our attention? Um, what is a prairie? For the purpose of this discussion, we're going to be using the terms grassland, the terms prairie, and savanna pretty interchangeably. These are three different words, and they are, different ecosystems, and they do have things that scientifically differentiate them from each other. However, the management of these different ecosystems are extremely similar. Today we're going to pretend that they're all just one thing and use the words interchangeably throughout the presentation. Um, Along with the terms grassland, savanna, and prairie, there's a whole other subsect of this sort of ecosystem, which people refer to as a pollinator garden, a pocket prairie, or a pollinator plot. These are more geared towards urban areas where maybe, that's having a prairie requires too much land, or the resources to make a prairie are not as readily available. These terms are quite buzzy and they kind of tend to go in and out of style. However, a pocket prairie, a pollinator zone, these are still very important and influential. So if you don't have the space necessarily for a large prairie, starting small is also fine too. Today we're going to be focusing on the larger scale of things, but a lot of the information that I give you today can be generalized and broken down into, something that's of a smaller scale. The definition. Today, the general definition for prairie, what we're going to use is that it is a biodiverse ecosystem that is composed of herbaceous and semi-woody grasses, forbs, and sedges, while lacking significant tree and shrub cover. So keep that in mind. That's what you're going to start off with. Prairies, why are they important? They are very integral ecosystems throughout the United States for many reasons. Historically, they made up much of the Midwest and surrounding areas. They naturally exist and thrive on flat, fertile soil. What's better than, for human development than this exact kind of ecosystem? So it really does make sense that, a lot of this prairie land historically is now being developed and has been developed. But it also makes sense that, we start to dedicate resources to restoring these sorts of ecosystems. Um, Prairies are very biodiverse. There can be upwards of 100 plant species in a single prairie ecosystem. High plant diversity promotes, high insect diversity, which then, in succession, supports many songbird populations. Um, and these populations, these insects are very beneficial further on to wildlife nutrition and breeding. Some species, such as like turkey and pheasant and quail, though these are all birds that rely on these sorts of ecosystems to thrive. Another great benefit of prairies is that they play a large role in erosion control and soil nutrient cycling. Individual plants in a prairie community, they help to improve soil composition and the structure of the soil itself. They also improve aeration, which is going to decrease soil compaction and, in turn, then decrease erosion. Along the lines of erosion and soil health, we've got water management. The long root systems of these prairie plants, they increase infiltration of water, which then is going to decrease runoff. Water runoff is a leading cause of erosion. When an environment lacks impermeability, or when an environment lacks permeability and it is impermeable, sheets of water will flow across the landscape. This is called overland flow. Overland flow, it, acts as a dislodger. It will dislodge and move soil particles, remove it from, where it currently is, and make it flow across the land. This can cause, something as insignificant perhaps as like, a little bit of erosion over a long, long time period, maybe 10 years, or it can be something as intense as a catastrophic mudslide. Um, the deep root structures that prairie plants have, they can sometimes go, as deep as 12 feet. They assist in water management in terms of holding soil intact and allowing the water to more easily percolate through the soil. From this, you'll in turn also have increased water filtration. So as water moves through the soil and into the water table or an aquifer, it is, but it's cleaned, in one way. A lot of the whatever particles may be in there will get held up in the soil and will not enter your water table. Um, Air quality is also something that prairies can, affect positively. Prairies are very diverse, like, I just said, and they contain a large amount of organic matter. This means that, there are hundreds and thousands of plants within the community, and they're all constantly photosynthesizing. From this constant photosynthesis, plant respiration will help, increase air quality the same way that a forest will. Um, Another very important aspect of prairies is that they hold carbon. So carbon sequestration. This is very important because there's a lot of roots and there's a lot of root turnover, and a lot of this carbon is held in these roots. So this means that there is constant decomposition and regrowth of organic matter both above and below the soil. Root turnover, which is death and regrowth of roots, this acts as a carbon sink and it aids in the healthy production of new life within a prairie ecosystem. So this kind of goes back to being, flat and fertile soil. This is what, aids in making the soil so fertile and so sustainable. Finally, prairies are pretty. I like the way they look. I think they look cool. So, they also can have value other than the environmental portion of it. They can be aesthetically pleasing. Here are some examples of, the communities that a prairie might support. On the left here, there's a little bird in a path there. That is a bobwhite quail. It was seen about 30 minutes outside of Nashville. Quail populations, they've been heavily decreasing over the last 20 years, especially in Tennessee. And prairies are important habitat types for quail specifically. Um, and then you can see in the other photos, we've just got a few pollinators other than the turtle. We have, pollinators that are on these native Tennessee plants. Many pollinators, they rely on these ecosystems for a large array of plants, instead of monoculture fields of grass, having this variety and, a biodiverse ecosystem really allows, pollinators to survive and have stable populations. And then in the middle, you got the little box turtle friend. I run into box turtles all the time. I usually run into them in the forest, but I also see them in prairies. It's really important not only to have plant diversity, but to have ecosystem diversity, habitat diversity. So, the ability for a species of, whether it's a deer or if it's a turkey or if it's a turtle, or if it's a tree frog, it's really important to have these different habitats. So they're not forced into one area and they have the ability to move, into habitats that may have different insects or may have different light availability. All right, I'm sure you've all seen this graphic before. It's a pretty common graphic. I think it's been up in every classroom I've ever been into. But just because it's common, kind of all over the place, it's still very true. It's still a very, helpful graphic when it comes to really exemplifying the impact that prairie plants versus non-native plants will have on soil as well as just, overall their root structures. Um, in on the right here, you can see these plants are not bad. They are most likely plants that you would find in something like a Home Depot, usually non-native. They still have blooms and they're still beneficial to the environment. It's better than having no plants at all. But you can see that the plants on the right here in the diagram, they have much smaller root mass, especially the turf that you see, the fescue. Their impact that they have on the environment and mitigating certain factors that maybe we cause as humans, their impact is going to be much, much less. Where if you look at the native prairie plants on the left, you can visually clearly see that their root mass is much larger. They're gonna be able to have a much larger impact on the ecosystems in terms of making it healthier or making it more self-sustained. Okay. Foundations and planning and preparation. So I am going to briefly touch on different kinds of prairie establishment, and then we're going to go into how to actually start preparing your land for a prairie installation. It's really important to know where you're starting from. Today, we're going to mainly focus on reconstruction, which is a form of prairie. But in order to do that, you need to know what you're working with. So we have restoration, which is when you have an already somewhat established prairie or have desirable plants. And in this restoration, this prairie, when you already have desirable plants, there's usually been some sort of management in the past, whether that was actual planting or just general like species composition management. Um, that is restoration. When you're taking a prairie that already has desirable species and you are improving upon it. And then you have reconstruction, also known as recreation. This is what we'll be focusing on today. This is when you take a landscape that has little to no existing desirable plant community, and through management, you're going to turn it into a prairie. For example, this would be turning a hayfield into a prairie or turning a row crop agricultural field into a prairie. Um, and then lastly, we have a remnant prairie. These are pretty rare. They they're historically an area that has been grassland or prairie that has had little to no historical anthropogenic influences. So it's very rare that you will see a remnant prairie that is not currently maintained or doesn't have any work that's being done to it annually. However, it still means that when this prairie was happened upon however many years ago, it was already still intact. And there are remnant prairies still in Tennessee. There's not very many, and it's likely that all of those are actively being managed and not just left, on their own. Because if they were left on their own, chances are invasive species would come in and knock everything out. Okay, so a really important step in the planning process is evaluating your land. So right now, we know the kind of prairie that we're working with, and now we need to figure out what the conditions are of this prairie. I personally recommend that everybody starts by um, looking at the existing plant community. What kind of plants are there? Are any of them desirable? Most likely, there will not be any desirable plants, and if there are, there will be very few and far between. In this situation, if undesirable plants, greatly outweigh the desirables, the next realistic step is to then start from scratch. Unfortunately, this does mean that you are bringing the plant community back to zero. You're starting over. So knowing what's there is very important. Also, going forward, if there's things that's there that you maybe somewhat enjoy, you can know that going forward that they do thrive in that area, in that ecosystem. What are the moisture levels for your specific area? Is there standing water for portions of the year or is it very dry? If there is standing water, this will greatly alter your species mix as well as the planting time. And it's very, very important that you figure out these conditions, these moisture levels, in the planting process, rather than the day that you go to plant, or even worse, 3 weeks after you've planted, then all of a sudden there's standing water, 4 inches deep, where you just put a whole bunch of seed that probably can't handle that amount of moisture. This is stuff that you have to figure out on the front end to kind of save yourself and save your time once you're really in it, once you've started to make some moves and plant. Next, the tree cover and the sunlight availability is something that you have to analyze on your property. The ecosystem that you're crafting, it's going to need ample sunlight. So you have to know, are there too many trees? Are there invasive shrubs such as, honeysuckle or privet? There are too many trees and, these trees are native. Maybe instead of removing all of them, you just pare them down to increase the sunlight in a way that will allow the plants that you'd like to thrive. If you have invasive shrubs, you'll have to treat them before you remove them. You can't just remove what you see on the surface. You can't just, cut them at the base, at the ground, and take off all the biotic matter on top. You have to treat them first because they will come back, and they probably won't come back until you've already planted, and by that point it'll be kind of too late. You can still treat them, obviously, but you do want to treat your new prairie with care. You don't really want to put a whole lot of equipment on it. So dealing with that on the front end is the best way and most effective and efficient way to go about it. Um, Another really important thing is what kind of soil are you working with? So this one can go somewhat overlooked because you don't see the soil necessarily. You might see some rocks, but other than that, you don't necessarily spend, time digging on your property most likely. But it's extremely important, you have to know where the bedrock is. Tennessee can have super shallow soils, and this will definitely impact the root depth, and it will also impact the chemistry of your soil. Depending on what kind of bedrock it is and where it is, it can make the soil much more acidic and it will change the chemistry and the structure of your soil. Um, are your soils mostly clay? Are they sandy? Are they super rocky? If you might not know that you have a whole bunch of rocks underneath your soil, and that's going to impact how water moves over it. That's going to impact, the nutrient availability for plants. All these things are going to impact the methods for planting, and they're also going to impact the species that will naturally thrive in your area. A soil test, this can be really helpful in determining if your soil lacks core nutrients. So the Ag Center at University of Tennessee, if you are here in Tennessee, they will accept soil tests. You can just bring in a baggie of your soil. I suggest, at least getting 10 to 12 inches of a cross section of your soil over multiple areas that you wish to put prairie in. You mix that soil up, you let it dry, bring it into the Ag Center. They'll take it from you, and then they'll send you back a whole bunch of information about it. There are other companies that do it. The Ag Center is probably the most accessible, I believe. But they will tell you, maybe you're lacking some sort of nutrient, you're lacking nitrogen. This is when you would then know that you have to, or it's recommended that you should add some soil amendments. It can also tell you if your soil is too acidic, do you have to add lime? You want to put all this extra work in now rather than later. One of the last major things is what the past management has been. You know what you're converting, maybe you're doing a reconstruction, you're starting from zero, but what was it before? Was it an old hay field? Was it an ag field? Were there livestock on the property? Did you have pigs or cattle grazing? That's gonna, change the nutrient flow of your property. On top of that, if it was an ag field, do you know what kind of chemicals were used? Some chemicals have residual soil activity. None of this is going to, none of this will keep you from having a successful prairie, but it's all information that will help you set yourself up for success. It's all stuff, that you should know because prairies, they're such delicate ecosystems. There's a reason that there's not as many around anymore. So it's very important to set the prairie up for success, set yourself up for success by preparing and planting species that are going to naturally do well in your area. Just because you may see a plant in Tennessee or maybe next to your house doesn't mean that it's going to do well in the exact area that you've chosen for your prairie. So these characteristics of your land are integral when moving forward with the idea of what you want your prairie to look like. Okay. You need to understand and you need to set goals next. This is a really fun part, in my opinion. I love this part of the planning process. I love talking to landowners in this process because it's really time that you get to think and you get to kind of, have whatever opinions and decisions you want. And you don't have to base it in reality. So, envision your ideal prairie. What does it look like? How tall is it? How tall are the grasses? What color are the flowers that you see? Is it improving any unwanted environmental conditions potentially? Are there animals in it? Is there a deer in it? Are there songbirds nesting? There are really no limitations to this prairie that you're crafting in your brain. You could have unicorns running through it if you want. I don't care. I want to hear about it. Tell me about it. As a land manager, I want to hear and I want to understand all of these ideas that you might have. Because from there, what we're going to do is we're going to pull out the important parts and we're going to make them realistic. Another big aspect of this is what is your timeline? Prairies take, at least 3 years to establish. Um, are you ready to dedicate, your land to this type of ecosystem? It's Prairies are not the hardest thing. They're not impossible, but they're also not the easiest. It is sometimes frustrating, you might not see what you want in the first 2 years of your prairie. Are you ready to have the patience for your prairie to dedicate whatever resources you have, available for this? Are you willing to do that? Um, I think the answer should be yes, but I also understand that sometimes that is not the answer. It's also, very difficult if you start your prairie, process and then 2 years into herbicide treatments, you kind of decide that you don't want to do it anymore. That's just something that next time you decide to do it, you'll have to restart. You'll have to start from scratch again. So it's really important to make sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into, but also how great it can be once you're there. All right, so we have your wildest prairie dreams. You've told me all the weird stuff that you want in your prairie, and I say that sounds so great. Um, and then from there, I'm going to decide what is achievable. So this is expectation management. I do so much. This is expectation management is a very large chunk of what I do when I first begin to communicate with a landowner. Because I want to give you what you want, whether that's a certain plant or something environmental, like, maybe you have flooding after large rain events, and you want to deal with that. I'm going to work with you, and Ecologist is going to work with you to get you to where you need to be. But sometimes what you want and what you need might not always look the same. Whether that's a certain plant or something environmental, like I just said, there's going to be some discrepancies. So, for example, let's say that someone has a really dry and rocky soil, and they come to me and they ask for a field of mostly blue lobelia and cardinal flower and sedges. Well, blue lobelia, cardinal flower, sedges, those are moisture-loving plants. They love to be moist. They love to have great soil underneath their feet. Um, Not really possible if you have super rocky and super dry and super clay-ridden soil. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask this person, what is it that they like about these flowers? Why do they have such an interest in sedge? is there anything specific that they really enjoy that maybe they'd find somewhere else in a different kind of plant? And then we'll find an alternative species composition that will then thrive within the confines of their soil chemistry and moisture levels. Um, because otherwise, I could just say yes. Whoever, find an ecologist is just going to say yes. I'll plant you this blue lobelia in sedge field in your clay, heavy, rocky soil, and then in 3 years, they're not going to have that. They might have a few blue lobelias and maybe some sedges that are doing okay, but it's not going to be what they expected it to be, and it's not going to have the environmental impacts that they really thought that it would. So at the end of the day, it's best to remain realistic, and there's always another alternative. There's always another species that is going to check that box for you that is also going to do well in your soil. And lastly, it's you have to be patient. You have to be very patient, but also it's very important to know that a grassland, it may be low maintenance, but it is never going to be no maintenance. Um, if you properly prepare your land, it will be much lower maintenance after establishment. If you do the steps correctly on the front end, once you've seeded and things are planted, you're going to be in a much better spot than you would have been otherwise. But if you skip steps, you'll forever be fighting the invasive species that were there before. Um, so you just have to remember that there's always going to be a little something to do, but if you put the time into it now, that little something to do will be much more enjoyable. All right, now we're going to talk about implementation. Um, Again, we're focusing on a recreation, so these processes apply to that. Um, it's very important to think about site prep, to think about planting and maintenance. Um, Overall, site prep, planting, maintenance, those are the main milestones that you're going to hit within your prairie journey. Each of these steps they're very important. I believe that the most important is site prep. It's extremely imperative that the land is properly treated and managed before seed goes into the ground. I don't know very many or any other ecologists who would disagree with that. Um, all right. For site prep, it's usually, the longest and the most difficult part of the prairie implementation process. It's also the most important. Once you have decided where you want, your prairie to be, you decide your management area, and what your goals are, you can immediately start site prep. The main goal of site prep is you want to terminate the existing vegetation and you want to prepare the seed bed for planting. This is also the time to apply any soil amendments based on your soil samples. If you go back to the pre-planning process, we talk about soil amendments, that's where soil samples, that's when your amendments come into play, which is right here. Um, a main factor is terminating the vegetation. So, all right, chemicals. Let's do the chemical thing. I'm not a chemical enthusiast. I do not love chemicals. I'm not advising that, you use chemicals for every kind of management. That's for sure. And chemicals not the answer to everything. When it, there are other options. However, when it comes to, correctly prepping the landscape for native worm season grasses and forbs, this is the most effective and efficient method. There are alternatives. I will talk about those in a second, but if there is a time and place for chemical, this is it. Um, there needs to be at least 3 broadcast herbicide applications on your seed bed. It's very important that these sprays are effective and they are complete. It's also, it could be more than 3 sprays. It's really hard to, draw any rules that are set in stone just due to the variability of the environment and due to the variability of everyone's properties are different. So as a minimum, we usually say 3, but it could be more, one per season and then perhaps another one in the spring. But we'll talk over that. I advise to use a non-selective herbicide such as glyphosate. Um, Also, as a disclaimer, if you do use it, please read the label and follow the safety instructions for, mixing and use. That's super important when you are using chemical. You want to make sure that you're following any, safety issues or any, safety instructions they may have. When herbicide is used correctly, it can be an amazingly effective tool. However, something that I really want you to focus on here is that when I say when it is used correctly, so what I mean by that is correct herbicide use, which that is when you mix properly. So you're using the correct water to chemical ratio, and you're maybe also, if needed, adding a surfactant or some sort of binding agent that's going to help the chemical stick to a plant. And also, the second part of this is that it is used at the proper time. Timing is both seasonal and weather-based. If you mix correctly, you're mixing correctly and then you're treating in the proper season during the ideal weather window, your herbicide use will be limited and it will be effective. That is for sure. Um, Another note, like Kindred, me personally, we are certified through the state to use these chemicals. So you don't always have to be certified. Some of these chemicals, such as glyphosate, you can use on your own as long as you follow the instructions and, whatever EPA guidelines there are. However, Kindred itself and many other land management companies have to be certified to use them, and we are. Um, Alternatives to chemical. There are alternatives. Some examples are you can solarize, you can, do sod removal, or you can physically pull the vegetation, season after season. These are all very labor intensive, and honestly, they're mostly pretty ineffective. Especially, when you're on a site that's large, it's you can't rip out sod for multiple acres. Again, you could, but that would involve putting a lot of machines on your property probably, which is going to be much more detrimental to the soil health and soil structure than using chemical will be. Um, Again, with expectation management, if you choose to not use herbicide, you have to adjust your expectations for success and stand establishment. And your long-term maintenance, that's also going to be impacted if you don't use chemicals. So you should assume that if you don't use herbicide, the result of seeding and then resources used and labor hours, they will be negatively impacted. That's not to say that, you can't do a little bit of both. This is a personal decision, but usually chemical, when used correctly, is going to be the most effective and simple route. All right. So I just talked about a lot. We're going to do a little recap of what I just said so we're all on the same page. So right now, you landowner, you have defined goals and objectives. You have a terminated seed bank with no soil and you have no live vegetation, and you have a clear defined management area. You got all that stuff. Next steps. We're going to determine our seed mix. We're going to determine our planting method. And then we're going to time planting with the correct season and moisture levels. And then finally, we're going to monitor growth and we're going to spot spray when necessary. Okay. So Prairie implementation timeline. So we're going to go over the Prairie implementation process and the main aspects of this. They're determining your seed mix, your planting method, and the ideal season and weather for your species composition. We're going to plan your seed mix. What's in it? What do you need to know? This goes back to the early planning steps where you're evaluating the conditions of the land that you wish to manage. You're going to use your knowledge of your property, the region of your land and your management goals. These are all going to inform your seed selection. Each species of grass and forb or sedge, these have characteristics and they're going to help you reach whatever environmental or aesthetic goals you're looking for. This is a very important step, and I recommend consulting with an ecologist prior to purchasing seed. There's ecologists in the private sector, such as myself. There are state agencies, which I'll hit on at the end, and then there are nonprofits such as TEC that they will be able to help, or they'll be able to direct you to resources as needed. Remember, your aesthetic goals. Remember what you wanted your prairie to look like, and then how you wish your prairie to look. And then finally, we're going to look at the species, plants, and how well they're going to do on your property. they must be able to survive. They must be able to thrive in your area, which, we've hit on many times. So now you have your seed mix with the correct ratios and the correct live seeds per acre. You have pretty bare soil because you've terminated and you've treated, whatever undesirable vegetation you have. And then you've exhausted the seed bank, and now we're gonna get ready for planting. So before you plant, you need to know how you're gonna do it. Are you gonna use a no-till drill? Are you gonna broadcast your seed? Can you frost seed? Where you are in the country, is frost seeding a viable option for you? I'm not going to go into too much depth on the planting methods, but using a no-till drill or broadcasting seeds, these are the two main methods that you'll see generally. The method that's right for you and your management area, it will depend on many factors, but most importantly, the most influential ones are how stable your terrain is, how much organic matter is on the surface of your soil, and if you have access to certain equipment. Planting is a very important step because there are many variables that go into a stand succeeding. Um, these important factors can include planting depth, seed to soil contact, soil moisture levels, um, and in general, like how effective your planting method was. If you do use a no-till drill, do you know how to properly use it? Is it properly calibrated? Um, this, goes on for seed to soil contact. For reference, seed to soil contact is when the seed makes direct contact with bare mineral soil. This process is hindered when site prep is not done properly. So when it comes to planting methods, I also, recommend consulting with an ecologist prior to throwing hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of seed on your property. Because if this is done well, just like soil prep, it will make the long-term maintenance of your prairie much less tumultuous. Okay, determining your planting season, your planting weather. Um, in general, the most important factors in determining the ideal planting time, there are soil moisture, soil temperature, and that there is no vegetation left on top of your seed bed in order to gain that seed to soil contact. The species you've decided to plant, they're tailored toward the conditions of your property. However, it is still very important that you choose a planting time that is going to favor these conditions. In most cases, it's best to plant in early spring, which is right after you've done your last herbicide treatment. And if these conditions are such that, maybe germination might be a little more difficult for some reason, because of environmental variables or other factors that might, fall into line, you might have to then change your planting time. Um, that's all dependent on what's happening at the environment and the time. If for some reason we have a really cold spring or a really hot spring, you're gonna have to change the time that you plant based off of the temperature of the soil happening at the moment. All right. So your pear is planted. What the heck do you do now? Now is when you begin maintenance. Most maintenance consists of monitoring new growth, terminating undesirables if they germinate, and conducting a prescribed fire or mowing every few years. As your prairie begins to green up, it will have both desirable and undesirable species. You've done the correct prep, but we can't account for everything. You've done your herbicide applications in every possible best manner that you could. You're still going to have some undesirables come up. In the first 2 years after planting is when it's important to walk your property and to spot spray when necessary. Any amount of time that you can allocate to monitoring and treating this newly planted area, it will be beneficial. Whether, you can manage one walk a season or you can be out there every 2 weeks. It's at this point you've done quite a bit, so do what little you can do next, and then that will help. That will definitely help you in the future. Um, After around year 3, fire is then recommended. Fire or mowing. Um, Mowing is not a one-to-one replacement for fire, but if fire is not possible, it can help you out in the same way. Just a quick look at some species. These are in the rosette stage. On the left, that's a picture that I took on one of our clients' properties. You can see there's two main different species there. You've got some goldenrod, and then you've got some rudbeckia, so some black-eyed Susan. Um, in the like little patchiness, you can see how small and short they are. they're really not that distinct. They're not like crazy looking. You wouldn't really know them from the picture on the right, which is a slightly older mare's tail. Mare's tail can look very similar to goldenrod. It's very hard to tell the difference. So this is when plant ID kind of comes into play. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to, read a whole bunch of textbooks, but knowing your prairie and knowing your property is really important at this stage in the process. Fire. All right. Fire is very important. It's really helpful in the path to a successful prairie. And prairie ecosystems, they've evolved to depend on fire and its ability to reset a landscape. Fire aids in the removal of organic matter on the surface of the soil. This then in turn, increases the chances, of a seed falling and hitting bare mineral soil. Fire can also, reestablish a healthy density of plants for sure. Um, there are so many non-native species that do not tolerate fire. So adding fire to a landscape will help the native plants that you want to be there, will help them reestablish, and it will push back non-native plants. I could talk about fire for hours, but I think I'm running a little bit low on time, so we're gonna speed past that. And we're just going to talk about seed mixes and some invasive species. I'm not going to go through all of these, but grasses, you're going to have your workhorse species, which are here on the left. I'm sure you've heard a lot of them, big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass. Then you're going to have your forbs. Forbs, these are, semi-woody flowering species. They tend to also do very well, a mixture of the two. You don't just want one or the other unless that's what you're going for, but a healthy biodiverse ecosystem is best. So these are some of the baseline seed mix options that you would have. Some common invasives in Tennessee, just so you can see them. We got narrowleaf plantain that grows in a lot of hayfields for sure. Tall fescue, also in a lot of hayfields and Johnson grass. Some people might not even know that they have Johnson grass because they mow so often. But if you let your land sit for a few months, pretty soon you'll have grasses that are up to your shoulders, and it's most likely Johnson grass. All right, some things to keep an eye out for. These are not necessarily non-native and they're not necessarily invasive, but blackberry is a pretty woody species that's gonna build up over time if you don't burn. And early successional trees, those are gonna start to encroach on your property as well, on your prairie. That's something to keep out for. Again, burning will keep this down. And then other undesirable grasses that, maybe weren't even there before, but now they've moved in for some reason. The way that invasive species travel is pretty aggressive and wild. And then ragweed, that's just an example of a species that is native, but it tends to really take over, and I don't like to see it in my prairies. Here's some resources that you guys can reach out to if you need help, other than Josh and I at Kindred, and you have TEC, but there are other opportunities, for resources, and there's, different funding out there, and there are federal programs that can help, do cost share. So if you do want a prairie, you're not doing the whole thing by yourself in terms of how much it's going to cost. We help a lot of clients get involved in those. So if you have any questions about that, please reach out. I know that it's difficult and there's a lot of red tape involved, so we'd be happy to help you with that sort of thing. And finally, just to recap, I said a lot of words, but prairies are important. They're cool. Prairies are your friend. They're my friend. Um, they're high in diversity. They do great with water management. Their erosion mitigation is phenomenal. They have so many positive impacts on the environment. Um, and these are all things that, are good to know whether or not you actually want a prairie. So, I mean, my final recommendation, if anything, is honestly, it's more of an opinion. I encourage everyone to walk their land. I think it's an amazing thing to really understand an ecosystem and watch it evolve. I always have to remind myself personally that evolution and improvement of an ecosystem is not always linear. And I think that learning how your specific parcel of Earth operates is really such a privilege to be able to do that. So even if you don't like get up from your computer and run away with a fistful of seeds and a drip torch, I hope that you at least take some time to learn and understand the natural world around you. I think that it's one of the most important and deep relationships that we can have, and I think it's pretty cool. So Thank you for your time and for your patience, and please reach out with any questions. And this will be posted to YouTube, so if you want to zoom back and re-listen to anything that I said, feel free to do so. So that's it. Thanks, guys.
Wow, what a beautiful message. So much good information in there. Thank you, Greta. Yeah, Bryn, are there any questions that our participants had?
May I, before we start very quickly, I just want to say, Greta, fantastic, amazing presentation. You went in all the details, and I think the most important that you emphasize the details, the complexity. And I want to say just very quickly one thing. One of the things that, in medicine, people say in a Hippocratic oath, do no harm. And that is not just in medicine, in throughout the environment. It is so important. And I think you emphasize it so well that the importance of site investigation and site preparation is the absolute crucial point to start a prairie. You talked a lot about herbicide treatment. I quickly want to mention there the do no harm goes in there on a sense that when you decide to do herbicide treatment, do no harm, you need to protect yourself as well. The biggest biggest surface of our organs is our lung. Whenever whoever does herbicide treatment, please make sure that you wear protective mask and protective glasses and wear whatever you're wearing to protect yourself. And awesome. And just one quick question I would like to throw to whether to Greta or Josh. There are so many levels that people can reach out to you with getting guidance. Could you tell me the level of help Kindred can offer to people?
Sure. We kind of cover the full spectrum from if you just want to call us and ask a question, we're happy to give you free advice. If it's a little more involved consulting project, we're happy to come consult all the way through full scale implementation if you want us to do every step of the project along the way. So, first, just give us a call, and if we can't answer your question or we'll get you to the right resource or person that can.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bryn, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Greta. Thanks, Josh. Prairies are important. Prairies are cool. I totally echo that statement. And I hope people catch on and are interested in doing this. We need them. There's been a massive decline in grassland bird species. And we want to bring back the quail, bring back the turkeys. We want to see the wildlife in Tennessee, which makes it so beautiful. So thank you, Greta. So Josh did a great job answering some of these questions in the chat, but I think one that he wanted to have you answer, Greta, live is from Mary. Would you ever recommend doing a prescribed burn before seeding?
That's a good question. Um, there's there's most likely a time and place for that. However, burning is not the easiest. It's not super easy to get fire in the ground in a lot of situations. So I would recommend burning after you seed. There are other things that we can use like herbicides that are going to replicate those parts of fire, and you don't want to use fire too much because you need fuel, you need stuff that's going to burn. So you would have to use herbicide to kill what you have, whether that's fescue or whatever, even if it's super super tall. So you'd have to use fire to burn that, or you'd have to use herbicide to then burn it. So you might as well just use the herbicide then, and then wait for the fire until you have the species that are really going to benefit from it. Um, Fire can add, certain nutrients and increase carbon and, nitrogen, movement and all that stuff. So the benefits that it's going to have will be much higher after you've seeded. So I would say wait, always wait unless you just like have the ability to burn stuff all the time and it's super easy, then go for it. But in most circumstances, it's going to be the most beneficial and time effective to burn after you've seeded and put down all the stuff that you really want to make sure that you're managing for.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. have a couple questions from Renee. She's managing a prairie restoration project. They're 3 years in at the moment. They have a huge infestation of hedge parsley. What's the best way to deal with this?
Um, so there's a few different options. It kind of depends on what other species you have that are desirable in your prairie. Do you really believe like the scales are tipped more towards what you have desirable is much higher, and where you want to make sure that you protect that? There are certain chemicals that you can use that are um, selective. There's a chemical called Plateau, which is a brand name, but you can find other generic versions of that. And what that is, it's specifically made for prairies. So it has prairie plants have intolerances to like this chemical. You'd have to check the label to make sure. I don't know if specifically that invasive is on there, but there's that option. There's also other chemicals like clethodim, that those impact grasses. So there's selective herbicides that you could use. Other than that, you know, I don't know how that parsley is impacted with fire, but fire is also something that may help push that out. And if you are in year three, it might be time for fire at that point. So I wouldn't recommend like hand pulling it unless it's a very small portion. If it truly is taking over, um, something such as fire or selective herbicides such as plateau might be able to kind of tip the scales in the correct direction.
Yeah, that you kind of partially answered her next question about Renee has a very large site. We are hand pulling, but the site is large. Um, where'd it go? They're afraid of getting spray on the existing native wildflowers.
Hmm.
Will cutting it down before seeds work. Yeah, because I think hedge parsley is an annual, so
Yeah, so I mean, before it if you have big swaths of it and and before it like fully seeds out, yes, you can cut it back, and that will definitely like decrease its maybe it decrease where how much there of it there is the next season for sure. Hand pulling I would not recommend if there is a lot of it. That's just a lot of labor hours, a lot of time. Usually, you don't get the whole root system, and even if it is an annual, there's seeds in the seed bank. And I know that you don't want to impact the existing flowers that are there. So if you wait until the spring or whenever this hedge parsley starts to come up, you can do spot sprays where you're not doing like a broadcast application of herbicide. You're walking and you're looking directly at a plant and you're only spraying that. There might be some drift a little bit that might impact a little bit, of like some Rudbeckia or that you've got on the side there. But if as long as the conditions are right, like I talked about with making sure that the weather's right and that the season is right, it should not really impact the other species that you have, and it'll just be enough to hit your target species, and then from there you can either reseed or you can allow, the species that you want there to kind of like refill and encroach.
great, thank you. Um, Mary asked, do you need to do anything with the post-herbicide dead thatch before seeding?
Um, so I would recommend, which I didn't super hit on this, I would recommend making sure that when you are applying herbicide in the, land prep process, that you are not applying herbicide to like 3 feet of vegetation. You're going to want to mow it first, mow it high, because you need vegetation, to have something for the chemical to hold on to and for it to work. But you don't want to be applying because you'd have to use a lot of chemical, a lot of herbicide to be effective on that much vegetation. So in theory, if you mow your property first, just the treatment area, if you get everything maybe like 4 to 6 inches off the ground, if that's your first herbicide treatment, that thatch layer, the dead or organic matter that's there will not be there in 3 seasons. It's gone through a spring, summer, fall, winter, back to spring again. And as long as you are consistent with the timing of your herbicide applications after your original application, you shouldn't really have a whole bunch of organic matter. If for some reason you do, you can either change the time of your planting to give yourself more time in between, or you can like physically remove, rake, whether that's using a rake or using a tractor, remove that thatch layer. Or you can use a no-till drill, which can't get through everything, but a no-till drill is going to at least increase the probability of going through that thatch and getting straight into the soil and planting directly, a quarter of an inch down into the soil, even if you do have a little bit of thatch over it. A lot of variables that go into that. So if she has any more questions, I'd be happy to go further at some point. But in general, that's kind of what you'd be working with.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I put your contact info in the chat if you guys want to reach out. Next question from Kristen. What is the baseball total project cost to restore 1 acre lawn to meadow? That's probably a complicated answer.
It's for Josh.
There are nuances, but I'm happy to ballpark. Roughly 10,000 would be the ballpark for the entire process, and that would be spread out over the 18 to 24 months. That would be kind of hiring us to do it. If you're going to do it yourself, it's less than that to buy the chemical, buy the seed. If anybody's looking for a no-till drill, we have one. We're happy to do it. You can also contact usually your county soil and water conservation district / NRCS. Most counties have one available for rent, so there are other places to find a drill besides us.
I do want to add to that too. Like, the cost, that's a big number. That's a lot of money for sure. But the purpose of this talk in itself is hopefully to give people the tools to go off and do some of this work on their own. I don't think they should do everything by themselves, especially when it comes to planting and prep and all that. But usually seed for 1 acre is going to be anywhere from $400 to $800. Um, Other than that, a lot of this they can at least begin to do on their own. They can have the tools to do it. So they don't always have to hire somebody like me. I love to, be helpful. Josh and I love to, go around and look at properties. But you don't always need to be hiring someone to do all the work. So there is a world in which a prairie can exist and you can implement a prairie that is more affordable than hiring, someone to do every single aspect of it, for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Last question we have from Fran. Are prairies being taken over by blackberries? How do we stop this plant from taking over?
Burn. You burn or you mow. Um, it's really hard to use herbicide to kick blackberry out, but burning will definitely help. I said every 3 years, 3 to 5 years, you're gonna burn. You can mow annually. That's gonna keep the blackberry down too, and eventually the blackberry won't have, enough uh, nutrients. They won't be able to photosynthesize as much, so it will really knock the blackberry back mowing. I wouldn't recommend doing that forever, but if that is an issue that you're having, burning for sure if you can, but if that's not an option, then mowing.
Yeah, it's I could see that being a really tough one to get back.
Yeah.
If it once it takes over, it's just a thorny
Yeah,
thicket.
there's not a lot of like leaf surface, so it is hard to get with chemical, and because the leaf surface is so small, when you do spray the blackberry, you're probably going to be spraying other stuff. I don't know of any chemicals that are specific to blackberry and everything else is resistant to. So that's not really an option there. So more mechanical is going to be the route that you want to go for that.
Great, thank you.
If can I just say something that Greta was talking just a little before? Um, I know that the amount of money that they mentioned might sound a lot, but the experience is really that we often think that we can do something and we actually spend much more money on it if we try to do it ourselves and we fail and we have to redo and redo and redo it, compared to bringing in the expert in time. And I think Kindred just extremely well showed that they are absolutely the experts. So I highly recommend to reach out whenever you are doing a project like this, reach out to them and learn from them and get their expertise and get their work done there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Awesome. All right. Well, that I guess we'll conclude this amazing webinar. Thank you all for coming. I just posted a link to our YouTube channel in the chat because we will post this recording and send it out to everyone who registered for this talk. And please get in touch with these amazing people that have so much knowledge to share.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Thanks,
Thank
Greta.
you for the awesome presentation.
Thank you, guys. And thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you tuning in today.
Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.